What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Helmwood Shop and Smithy. I'm in the middle of a knife build right now. It has been ground, hand sanded, etched. The blade looks gorgeous. I went to put on the handles and I cracked one of the handle scales while I was driving in a pin. But the glue had already started to set at that point, so I decided I'm just gonna go ahead and let it dry and see what I can do to repair it once all that epoxy is cured. I have a couple ideas, so I figured I'd make a short little video and y'all could just learn from my mistakes. So let's head over to the bench and see if we can save this thing. Here is the crack. You can see it goes all the way through the scale and it starts in that pinhole, which is very close to the edge of the scale, which unfortunately makes it a lot more likely to crack. But since it terminates at a hole, I'm not really worried about this crack continuing on down the piece of wood. I'm gonna go ahead and sand it and try to fill it with some super glue. You know, if I try to fill this, I'm gonna have to get super glue all the way up to the blade without getting any of it on the blade itself. Which is not going to be possible. Let's go ahead and do the plan that I think is going to be much more likely to work. So my second plan is to cut the scale in between the first and second pin and then just remove this whole chunk of the scale and replace it with another piece of wood so it just looks like it has a different type of wood as the bolster. But of course it can't just be that simple, because everything has to be perfectly even and square. So the first thing that I'm going to do is grind down the width of these scales. That way I can attach my plunge line guide. It's well, you've seen it. It's the file guide that I use all the time. And that'll help me get those perfect 90-degree corners that I'm looking for. Alrighty then. I have this all ground down thin enough so that it fits in the file guide. Now I'm just going to make a mark with a pencil where I would like my bolster to begin, and then I will tighten down the file guide right along that line. So now that this is all tightened up, I'm just going to take a pull saw and very carefully cut off this piece of the scale. I'm going to leave it a little bit proud so that I can file it to its final shape. That went really well. Hopefully the other one does too. That one went even better. This is on the up and up. I have high hopes. I'll just try to gently tap this chisel in there. And there we go. Come on. Oh, you know you want to come on. All right. Now it's time to get these flat. So after filing, it left this sort of like fuzz on the edge here, and I'm afraid that that would give me a bad join when I glue on the bolster, so I'm just going to clean it up with a little X-Acto knife thing here. Well, that appears to have gone pretty darn well. One of these sides I definitely need to touch up a little bit with a file. They're not perfectly even, and I think that using the file guide was a good way to get me close to the point that I needed to be, but not enough to get me there exactly. So I'm going to make a little 90-degree block and attach sandpaper to one side of it, and then slide the safe edge along the tang just to make sure that these get evened up as best as possible before we put on a bolster. And there we go, the ends are all squared up. Because I'm not going to be able to get the edges of those scales 100% perfect, I'm going to put a spacer in between the bolster material and the scale. That way it will disguise any inaccuracies in that join. It will also help correct any structural flaws therein, because everything will be filled with material and adhesive. I'm going to apply some super glue, smear that around, and stick my bolster to it. Now that these have had some time to set up, I'm just going to trim off this excess leather with an X-Acto knife. And in order to get these inside edges perfectly flush, I'm going to take off the rest of this leather by pushing it on this piece of sandpaper on a granite stone. And in order to get rid of the rest of this excess leather on the inside, I'm just going to flatten it on this piece of sandpaper stuck to a granite tile. Now, normally you can move it in all directions, but with the leather glued on here, you really don't want to separate it from the wood, so you only cut on the push stroke. I got the top of this finished up to 1200 grit finish, so now it's time to glue on the first bolster. So as you can see, that bolster is glued up, it is in place. So now I'm gonna drill some holes through it and then glue on the bolster on the opposite side. It looks great. So I have my holes drilled in this side of the bolster. I'm gonna go ahead and grind this down flat, and then I'll take it to the drill press and drill through these holes and out this side. After that, I will grind this to its final width. That way I can chamfer these holes, put the pins in, and then peen them over into the chamfer slots. And it is finally time to glue in these pins. After grinding that flat, I can see that the transition between the handle scale and the bolster is nice and tight. Exactly how I wanted it to be. So I'm pretty happy with how well this went. And now I'll tap these in. The guy that I'm making this knife for, he asked for it to look very medieval. That was his specific request. So I'm going to put a file finish on the handle here, and I'm going to leave it somewhat rough. I'm just going to take off the tops of the file marks with some very fine grit sandpaper to kind of smooth it all out. But I really want that really rustic, handmade look. Now that this is filed just about to shape, I'm going to stabilize the edges of this leather with some CA glue. Now with the super glue hardened, it's a lot easier to get a nice clean transition across this leather spacer. I sanded the top off all these file marks with some 1500 grit sandpaper, and it is now time to oil. So this is definitely going to be one of my go-to methods if I run into this issue in the future. Of course, this wouldn't always work. It would really depend on where on the scale the crack was. If it was in the middle or in between two pins, you're going to have to take the whole thing off and replace it. Which that really isn't a huge deal anyway, but this definitely makes it so I don't have to waste as much material. And I don't know, I want to say that it takes a little bit less work, but that would be a lie. But aside from the handle repair, look at this knife. I put a antique patina finish on it, which I'll make a video showing you how I do that in the future. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you can see when I come out with new videos. So until next time, y'all have a good one.